Okay, so today what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to work on the lesson itself. So we're going to go ahead and go into Amplify. The lesson that we're working on is Unit 8F, Subunit 2, Lesson 2. What we're going to do here is go to the third tab, and it's got some reading assignments, okay? And then in addition to that, it's got some questions next to it. The very first one is talking about the competition the United States and Russia has had this whole time. And after about 20 years of that now, we're actually starting to sort of get along and work together a little bit. And that's what this whole article is. It's got 3 questions that accompany it. The first one is, what does Leonov say the purpose of the mission is? That's a little ways down in the article, but it does answer that pretty clearly. Second question is, what difficulty does Alexei Leonov encounter on the mission, and how does it affect the mission's purpose? They do have a couple of problems. If you think about what they were trying to do on this one, just to give you a quick synopsis of the article, this was the one where the United States launched a craft into space, and the Russians also launched a craft into space. And those 2 crafts got together in space and actually connected to one another, and it made it where they could physically communicate, right? They shook hands and saw each other through the capsule and everything. And it was a really big moment. If you think about how they made this thing happen, it's just crazy. Think about some of the action shows that you watch on TV, right? Where there'll be 2 cars going down the freeway, and they're trying to get to the same speed and have one person go between one car and the other. So that's what these guys are doing in space, right? And instead of cars, using spacecrafts. And the speed they're going is 30,000 kilometers an hour. It's a lot faster, obviously, than any cars. If you think about how precise they had to be. So when they first began doing it, they talk about the distances they were working with being in several kilometers, right? They're quite a ways apart. And then they had to close that gap until they could actually connect the two craft just right next to one another. That was a pretty big moment. So if you think about just actually pulling this thing off and succeeding in it, it's crazy. What a big event that was. But obviously it worked out real well. We've got the picture there that shows them. So really, really neat article talking about how they're doing it and everything. So go ahead and read through that and tell me what you think. The third question is, what did Leonov consider to be the historical and personal significance of this mission success? So this, again, was a big moment because not only did they do something that was really difficult, and it changed sort of the relationships, okay? If you think about if you and somebody you've been competing with for your entire life end up finally working on something together, you know, maybe you think there's going to be something that leads to that afterwards, right? Maybe that's going to be a continuing operation. And I think there was certainly some hope of that. So that's the first slide in the first article. The second article that we've got is kind of a biographical moment where a kid is talking about him remembering the moon landing itself. Okay, so kid's name is Smith, Andrew Smith, and the very first question is, why did Smith and his family have to wait so long for Armstrong to walk on the moon? What made Armstrong late? This was kind of another cool article, okay, because this is a firsthand account of somebody who's just a regular American, just a regular kid, who everybody was caught up in this, right? Whenever we sent them into the moon, everybody knew it was going to happen, and everybody was glued to their television sets. And so they had an expectation of what was going to happen, and we're in space. We're doing something that's never been done before. And there were delays. I will say the reason that they were late, I thought, was kind of a funny one. So read through the article, you'll find it. It's, to give you a hint on that one, it involves basic housework. And so that'll kind of point you in the right direction. The second question, this one, is, Neil Armstrong is expected to say something memorable when he first steps on the moon. What does he say? And what does Smith think the real poetry is for Armstrong? So the words that Neil Armstrong said are rather famous. I linked a video that shows the actual landing. I'm sure most of you guys have heard it. His words were, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. He put a lot of thought into those very few words. So it's kind of a clever way that he did this in the first place, because he didn't make this long, drawn-out Shakespearean soliloquy. He had this very short, smart statement. And then after that, of course, we have a little bit more that goes on. He gets a phone call on the moon, which is kind of cool. But the third question, explain what Armstrong does as he steps from the lunar module onto the surface of the moon. What is one way that Smith captures your attention in his description of this event? His actual exit from the craft and testing the surface and all of that, I mean, it really puts you in there kind of like an action movie. You know, you can't help but think, wow, yeah, that would be an intense moment. You're the first person to do this. The idea that, okay, I'm going to step foot on the moon, is it going to support me? Yeah, I mean, probably it's supporting the craft that's sitting there. But if you just think about the idea that, you know, you're doing something that nobody has ever done, probably is never going to do again. That's a big thing to go through. So that's the second one. It's a pretty cool article. I liked it. Let's go ahead and go to the third one. The third one is for you science folks out there, basically talking just about the moon rocks. This is a pretty short article. It's pretty straightforward. When we went to the moon, gathered up some rocks, stuck them in a sack, brought them home, and then we were going to be analyzed. The only part of this that I thought was really, really interesting is they wanted to make sure that the rocks weren't dangerous. And so they exposed a bunch of mice that were bred in an environment that contained nothing harmful. So what I mean by that is these mice had never been subjected to any germs of any kind in their life. And so because of that, they had basically no immunities to disease. Anything that was around, they were going to end up catching. So that's kind of a weird idea to test the rocks. So again, what they did was they put the mice and the rocks in the same thing and made sure that nothing happened to the mice because these mice had no immunities. I thought that was an interesting thing. First question in this one is, what was the scientist's first reaction to the moon rocks? Pretty straightforward. Second question on there is, why do you think the moon rocks were the most sought after, the most eagerly awaited of all specimens in the history of science? That's a big question. If you think about that one, these rocks came from a place that no one had been and no one is going to go back to. And when you want to think about the origin of the universe and how everything began, the moon is going to be a pretty good place to get some answers, right? Because it's untouched, right? There's nobody that's been there. There's no plants, there's no animals. So we don't have any idea of anything on it. And so we want to talk about an absolutely clean specimen. Those moon rocks certainly had that. And so if you can kind of think your way through, why would people be excited to have that? I mean, there's a lot of information to get from that. The third question is, the samples contained no traces of life or dangerous substances. How do you imagine the space program might have changed if the analysis had yielded different results? I mean, that's an easy one, right? If the samples had stuff in them, right? If they had organic material, if they had some type of life, that's going to change everything about the space program. I mean, we're going to have to go into this with a very different mindset than we have currently, which is, hey, it's all unexplored. There's nothing out there. There's nothing going to hurt us. If you have to go into it with a mindset that might be, it's very different. So that's what that question really kind of points you towards. The fourth one here is the picture of Earth from the Apollo 17, and that is followed by Carl Sagan's note from "You Are Here" from Pale Blue Dot. Carl Sagan was a science fiction writer, also a scientist, really smart guy. Pale Blue Dot is basically a big, long story about Earth, especially from space, the idea of our place in the universe. This is a big point that I think it's difficult for a lot of people to get, especially at your guys' age. The idea of human beings being small and being insignificant isn't something that really gets into our heads, right? We all have this idea that we're the most important thing in the universe because in our universe, there's nothing else. So Carl Sagan asks in the very first question here, Carl Sagan says that you cannot see any sign of human life, man-made machines, state borders from space. Why do you think he tells us this? What point is he trying to make? You can draw a lot from that question and from that statement, okay? The fact that we can't see anything that humans have done from space really gives you a point of our place in the world, in the universe. It's a very, very small. And that leads right into the second question. The second question is, Sagan writes, on a scale of worlds, to say nothing of stars or galaxies, humans are inconsequential. a thin film of life on an obscure and solitary lump of rock or metal. Explain what he means by that. To kind of guide you in a direction on that one, think about how small you end up getting. Like look at an anthill, okay? An anthill to them is the whole universe, right? They get outside of there and then maybe go forage a little bit. But one anthill, I mean, we step over them, step on them, step around them. There's so many. And that's their entire universe. As you zoom out and you think about Earth, and then it's just one planet in one solar system, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. When you look at that picture at Earth from the very top, it just, you can't see anything, right? You can't see anything that represents humanity. It's just this big globe. That's it. So kind of get into that one and answer this question. I thought it was a good question. Third one, if you took the Apollo 17 photograph of Earth, would you title it Pale Blue Dot? Why or not? Why not? It's just kind of an opinion piece. You know, it's a pretty small name for the whole center of our universe, right? Earth is everything that we know. It's everything that we have as humans. And it's just a pale blue dot. That kind of puts it in perspective. Would you call it that? I don't know. Let's hear what you guys think. On to the very last slide. This one is an interesting question, okay? This article is talking about a proposed moon colony. Sorry, a proposed Mars colony. They want to set this thing up in 2023. Now, that's only 3 years from now. And they're actually talking about funding this and sending a rocket with 4 colonists all the way to Mars with the equipment to set it all up. It's interesting that some of the people that are involved with this, one of the people involved is the creator of Big Brother, right? A reality TV show. Why would you choose that? Well, you've got to fund this thing, right? You got to find some way to pay for it all. How are you going to do that? I don't want to pay for it. And so broadcasting rights is actually one of the things that they're talking about doing. Having people being able to watch it on TV, that would be a source of income so that they can fund more colonists. Would you watch it? I mean, if 4 people decided to go all the way to Mars and they were going to try to set up a colony out there, would you watch their interactions? I mean, think about it. If you get mad at somebody, there's nowhere to go. There's no coming home, period. Once you go there, that's it. This is your whole future. So kind of an interesting idea. The first question they're asking, what are some issues Mars One encountered as preparations are made to send astronauts to the red planet? The Mars One had a couple of problems that came across. They're not huge things, but again, funding is part of it. The actual humanity of the people, whether or not they're going to be okay, is a part of it as well. Second question, what was the mission of the Mars One project? What are they trying to do? I already told you, basically they're going to build a colony to go to Mars. That's it, and they're going to send 4 people. The third question is the one that I'm really interested in, okay? If you don't answer anything else in this, answer this question, because this is a cool one. This is you getting to think for yourself. Would you want to travel to the red planet, Mars? Why or why not? Think about it, right? Knowing what you would have to give up, knowing the difficulty, would you want that adventure? I think it's a huge one. So those are your questions. Again, there's 5 slides. I know this is a little bit boring, but I hope that last question will kind of get you thinking, and I will say that some of these articles were rather interesting, what they talked about. So that'll conclude this video. There'll be 2 more for the week, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye. Bye.